My name is Lawrence Cohen, and I'm the director of the Center for South Asia Studies here at Berkeley. I'm a medical anthropologist who teaches both at Berkeley and UCSF. But of greater relevance to our being gathered together today, I am deeply honored to be the fourth occupant of the Sarah Kailat Chair of India Studies at UC Berkeley. Both this lecture series and this chair were a critical gift for India-focused research on this campus from Thomas Kailat and his friends Naren Gupta and Vinita Gupta in honor of Sarah Kailat on her 50th birthday. There is a beautiful and moving description of Sarah Kailat in your programs and of her life and family and work as a teacher and entrepreneur and traveler and volunteer and philanthropist. After years of living with a rare cancer, Sarah Kailat passed away in 2008, and this lecture series and the chair is now in her memory. The chair was first occupied by Professor Robert Goldman, who worked with Tom Kailat and the Guptas in establishing it to become integral to the life of India Studies on this campus, and then by Professor Thomas Metcalf, and most recently for many years by my friend and predecessor, Professor Isha Ray. As the current chair, I think about Sarah Kailat and her legacy in this gift every day, and I've read the words in your program many times in imagining what I am called to do. I want to thank the Blum Center for Developing Economies, whose beautiful building hosts us today, for co-sponsoring the event with the Sarah Kailat Lecture and the Center. I hope Professor Kailat will forgive me for saying a brief word about him as well. Thomas Kailat is, among many other honors, the recipient of the Padma Bhushan in 2009. Extraordinary honor. He's an electrical and control engineer, an information theorist, an entrepreneur, and the Hitachi America Professor of Engineering Emeritus at Stanford. Sorry about Stanford. He has done path-breaking work in signal processing and other areas of electrical engineering. He is the first India-born student to earn a PhD in electrical engineering from MIT, which I learned at a wedding of electrical engineers from MIT when I was given a history of electrical engineering at MIT, and you were first introduced to me some years ago. He's had a quite extraordinary scientific career with many awards, including the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, the topmost body presenting him with its highest award, the Medical of Honor. And the Institute of Scientific Information has put him in Nobel class for his contributions in mathematics and engineering. The talk today will be introduced by Professor Isha Ray. It's part of a larger program in which Professor Ray has been very involved at the center, called Urban Wash, Paradigms for Water, Sanitation and Hygiene for the 21st Century South Asian City. And I want to briefly read to you a bit about the program. With the rapid pace of urbanization in South Asia, there is a critical need to improve not only the current inadequate water supply and sanitation services, but also plan and meet future demand. As this demand increases at an accelerated pace, the issues to connect the supply and demand are being mired in various questions related to water availability, water quality, public health and hygiene, and cost-effective water provision and management. In spring 2002, the center launched a new initiative, Urban Wash, Paradigms for Water, Sanitation and Hygiene for the 21st Century South Asian City, an initiative designed to showcase various events and speakers focusing on addressing the urgent need to address urban water and sanitation issues in South Asia. Finally, Roni Nilekani will be introduced by Professor Isha Ray. Professor Ray's research interests are water and development. She's a professor here at Berkeley in the Energy Resources Group, or ERG, which I just learned is a pun, which took me years to realize. She has worked in common property resources and social science research methods. Her projects have focused on access to water and sanitation for the rural and urban poor and the role of technology in improving livelihoods. She and her students have worked on water projects in India, Turkey, China, Mexico, Tanzania, and California. Her research in California is focused on methods to elicit public perceptions of energy and climate change policies. She teaches courses on research methods in social sciences, water and development, and environmental classics. And in addition to research and teaching, she has extensive past and ongoing experience in the nonprofit sector on sustainable development in India and international development and freshwater related issues, which makes her the perfect person to introduce Rohini Nilekani. Isha.
Thank you, Lawrence. So it is a great pleasure for me to be here today to welcome all of you to our beautiful city and our beautiful university. And most of all, it's a great pleasure and honor for me, Rohini, to welcome you, our Sarah Kelath Memorial Lecturer, today. I can think of few women more deserving of the title of a woman in leadership than Ms. Nilekani. And I will share with you now just a few of her accomplishments by way of introduction. When Rohini was a young journalist and a young wife, she and her husband Nandan sank everything they had, which honestly wasn't that much even for 30 years ago, into a new and risky startup. And that startup became Infosys, which is now more or less an Indian tech legend. And Rohini became, shall we say, a former member of the middle classes. Since that time, she has thought long and deeply about how to responsibly use her fortunate circumstances, her passions, her integrity, her beliefs, and her values to greater social service of those less fortunate than she has been. She has devoted herself financially, but more importantly, intellectually and emotionally in social pursuits very close to her heart. One of these is safe and sustainable water for all, which will be the topic of our discussion this evening. Rohini is the founder director of Arghyam, India's only foundation focused exclusively on water for the poor and underserved. Arghyam has grown impressively into an international force in just 5 short years. And through her leadership of Arghyam, Rohini has found herself drinking tea, for which luckily, as you know, the water is always boiled, in small rural communities in Karnataka, and also, doubtless, drinking bottled water from the Swiss Alps, no doubt, at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Many grantees have noted in interviews that Rohini's personal commitment to each of her projects distinguishes her approach from that of many other donor agencies in the water and sanitation space. In addition to her passion for water for all, Rohini is deeply committed to literacy for India's 400 million children, most of whom are too poor to afford books. She is the founder chairperson of Prof Books, a non-profit publishing house that produces inexpensive but very high quality, and this has been very important to Rohini, that they be of high quality, although cheap, books for the unreached child. Since 2004, Prof Books has produced more than 10 million books in 11 languages. Most are priced at 25 rupees or less, that is about 46 cents by today's exchange rates. And these books are truly beautifully written and illustrated, often in the style of traditional Indian art. Okay, so now you're thinking, fine, this woman is beyond full-time occupied, but you would be wrong. Rohini is also the author of a novel called Stillborn. She's also the author of a volume of dialogues with business and social leaders called Uncommon Ground. And she is the author of several children's stories for Prof Books, including The Cap and the Moon, which I have personally read to my son maybe 50 times. She's also a trustee or board member for several philanthropic ventures on environment, sustainable development, education, and microcredit. I am truly delighted to welcome to Berkeley today journalist, water activist, literary activist, writer, philanthropist, and mom of 2, a true woman in leadership, Rohini Nilekani.
I don't think I've had that kind of intro before, so thank you so much.
Should I use the mic or can I be heard? So when Rohini graciously agreed to be our speaker today, she said she would welcome a more interactive format than yet another PowerPoint-led talk. And I knew exactly what she meant by yet another PowerPoint-led talk. So we decided to make the lecture a little more conversational than usual. First with me, and then opening up to you, the broader audience, whom we are so happy to see with us this evening. So Rohini, again, we really thank you for joining us today, for coming to Berkeley to speak with us tonight.
Thank you so much. It's a great honor. Thank you.
I would like to ask, to start with, what brought you to Safe Water for All as your core challenge? Of course, there is no, shortage of social challenges in India to pick from. So what was it about water that moved you to place it at the top of your service agenda?
Right, so when I came into a bit of the money she was talking about earlier, I figured that I would like to, I had been doing some ad hoc philanthropy and I had been doing some work in education especially. But a lot of people were focusing their attention on education, and it did seem like we had reached almost a tipping point in terms of just the amount of attention coming into education. And I was looking for some other focus area where we could have some strategic impact and where there were clear gaps. And it so happened that we started thinking about water, the CEO that I had hired then, whom you also know, Sunita. And as we started researching this, we realized that not too many other Indian foundations, actually we couldn't find any at the time, were focusing most on water, and that too on lifeline water, which meant water for just drinking and washing and really basic livelihood needs as well. So without knowing anything more than how to spell water way back in 2005, we literally jumped in the deep end, and it's been a tremendously steep learning curve for us to find out just exactly how critical water as a resource has always been and how much of a crisis it is, crisis proportions it is reaching in India now. So I'm very happy that Argyam and our whole team started focusing on this and supporting people who were working in the political and social spaces in water.
And tell me how you have personally experienced that water has reached, or a scarcity of water or lack of access has reached crisis proportions. What do you mean by that?
So if we look at the big picture, and I'm sure many of you in this room might know, that India is not very water poor. We have 4,000 billion cubic meters, BCM of water resource availability. Actually, the real availability is much less, real water that you can use, because some of it is locked up in the glaciers and very deep in the aquifers, but there's about 1186 BCM that's supposed to be available for use. But with our growing population and with increasing pollution of our freshwater sources, actually the amount of water that is available per capita is declining to what is called as the stress mark of around 1,000 cubic meters per person. So at the big picture level, yes, just the sheer availability of water per capita, if you look at India as a whole, is going to reach that stress point pretty quickly. But more than that, it's because of India's water being distributed so unequally, where of course in the northern parts of India you have more water than you know what to do with and have to cope with floods every year, and of course in the desert regions and in parts of the south of India you have very little water. In the western parts of India, as little as 150 millimeters of rain in a whole year, some of which can just fall down in one shower, and that's it, no more water. And people have learned over centuries to cope. But I think the situation is overpowering people and the institutions and the norms and the practices that there used to be. So that's why I would say that there is a crisis both of availability, of quantity, and increasingly of governance and management.
So your organization is now funding many water projects implemented through and by other NGOs of repute.
Yes.
And I think we'd be interested to know, give us some examples of your water work through your other grantees, and also tell us maybe what you look for when you decide, yeah, we will fund this water project. No, we will not fund that water project. What are the things you look for in what is a worthy project leading towards safe and sustainable water for all?
Right, so when we started in 2005, we were chasing NGOs saying, can we please fund you to do something? You know, we exist, we have good intent, and we really do want to work with you and learn. So that's how we started building a portfolio of friends and partners. And one of the first things that Mihir Shah, who is now with the Planning Commission of India, gave me very good advice. Please don't enter this space as a patron. come in as an equal partner. Don't think that just because you're bringing in financial resources that you can, alter the terms of this arrangement. It was a very good lesson because one of the things that we look for in the projects and people that we support financially is that it should be a mutual partnership, and I think that was important for us. But let me just see if I can give you. We started learning the hard way. So we did a lot of work first just in the tribal areas of in the north, just helping people basically to revive some of their traditional water harvesting practices, whether it was gravity-fed mountain streams, whether in the west in Rajasthan, it was very low cost but very effective community management of rebuilding of old water bodies that had become neglected. And then we looked at rainwater harvesting in small villages near Bihar. There was a group of NGOs in Bihar that was talking about, called Megh Pine Abhiyan, which means the movement for water from the sky, which really was working in the flood-prone areas of Bihar, where I don't know if it was a shock to me when we went and saw that when the flooding came and many of the poor actually had their lands and all their assets just washed away quite pathetically year after year. For 4 months of the year, they actually had to move their belongings and live on the embankments, which was the only safe place for those 2 or 3 months. And believe it or not, some of the very initial work we did seems very simple when you look at it, and which was just to say that even though you are in this situation, no schools, no homes, no toilets, it's just not the right way for people to live for those 3 months. But they were drinking contaminated flood water. And this group that we were supporting did something very simple, which was on those embankments, we put up small plastic structures to harvest the rain, which was free from disease. And for those 3 months, and it somehow began to help people to internalize the locus of control. So then from there you start thinking of other things. Then what about sanitation? What about going to the root cause of why we are living for 3 months on this embankment? Sometimes in deep poverty I find you get stuck in a kind of helplessness, and just a small catalyst action can trigger a people's movement. So these were the kind of things that we supported then. And then as we grew to doing more and more work around the country, I think we began to develop a philosophy and approach. And it was really this: how do you get people to empower themselves to look at the solution, to build the quality of demand on the public service system? So, but let me just show you a couple of pictures So say in Rajasthan, this is the kind of tankas and water bodies that used to exist and that had pretty much got eroded. And some champions like Anupam Mishra and one of his proteges, Farhad, have set up an organization called Sambhav that just goes from village to village, gathering people together, and they are asked to put in Shramadan or put in their own work, and government puts in some money or community collects some money and revives these kind of water bodies, and then they do shared agriculture practices. And honestly, we ourselves have seen quite a bit of this is the old picture where women still in Rajasthan unfortunately do carry pots of water on their head, but it is going to change. So we are also working with the government, which is now coming up with multi-village piped water schemes in Rajasthan, but some of this is still important as conjunctive use, so that if the pipes don't work, you do have recourse to something that you had people's institutions built around. So keeping both those alive is something that we have been trying to do, because here's a very beautiful old kui from which even today in that area, for miles around there's no other water source, but thousands and thousands of livestock come to this place, and villagers from all around come to this one single well, and I've seen it myself, I've been there, and it's quite amazing how that water is managed so well. That little water is managed so well and serves thousands of livestock. So that's the kind of thing we have helped support, because what is this? This is the Rajasthan Canal. Crores of rupees have been spent on India's water infrastructure, and I'm not saying that's wrong, but I'm saying that at the tail end, you might have more sand in it than water. And if we don't have these other things that are going to make that water, you don't want to be left with this water for sure. or non-water. So that's the kind of work we've been supporting. In some sense, it is political work because it is bringing societies together to respond to their own local problems in a local way.
Yeah.
Similarly, we want India's water infrastructure to develop. But in the meantime, what are people to do? So, there's a lack of energy. We don't have reliable energy. So when you have water infrastructure that depends on pumps and electricity, you get sometimes stuck. Whereas gravity-fed spring systems that we are supporting in Uttarakhand and in many of the in the northeast also, is helping people to do very simple, cost-effective water storage, filtering, and finally you have gravity-fed systems that have tap water for the people without them having to go very far. So that is more or less the kind of work that we have been supporting. Matka filters, simple, get rid of some of the bacteria. You can't get rid of arsenic, but you can get rid of some. It is putting power back in people's hand to solve their own problems. This is EcoSan, composting toilets, because we are facing tremendous groundwater contamination through nitrates all around the country. And simple solutions like this help us to capture the nutrients from human waste and put it back where it belongs, into the soil instead of into our water bodies. So these are the kind of things in Kerala also, which has been renowned for its water harvesting and other practices. But many of its open wells are now getting into disuse. And we are saying, in Argyam, our partners are saying, if you look at India's shallow aquifers and rejuvenate them, then in your backyard, you have a fairly reliable water source that gives you visual clues. Unlike your bore well, which is deep in the ground and you don't know how much of the aquifer you're drawing out, your open well gives you visual clues. It can be managed locally and it can remain a reliable resource. That is actually the kind of stuff that we are doing. Fluoride, water quality has become a frightening issue in many parts of the country. In arsenic, as you know, in the West Bengal region, but also in other parts of the country, as we draw water deeper and deeper out of our aquifers, we find more and more contamination. And using rainwater when you can, at least for drinking, for the dry months. And how do you do that? And do it in a way that's sustainable for the people. So there are these little rainwater harvesting structures which bring water inside the house for storage, where the woman knows and sees how much water she has and finds ways to use it for the dry months. Again, aquifer recharge. So these are some of the kind of the pictures that tell you some of the work that we are doing. But we're doing a lot more as well.
Now that's wonderful. I want to ask you a follow-up question about all of this work and all of these projects that you've shown so compellingly. So Argyam's funding model is that it makes grants. It doesn't make loans, as far as I know, right? And so it's evolved its own approach to financing water. And the reason I'm asking this question is when I have conversations with colleagues about the water crisis in India and so on, nobody disagrees with me about the need, but they all want to know, how do you finance the thing? And financing and modes of financing for the poor are a hotly contested area, as you know. What is your grant-giving model? What is your support model, so to speak, for these communities? And in what way is it different from that of maybe other donors or grantors?
Right, so Argyam's work, to remind you again, is in lifeline water. So so we don't really look at big agricultural water so much. Whereas in agricultural water, there have been practices of farmers paying in some way for irrigation is becoming more common than we think. But when it comes to lifeline water, there is a very lively debate in India about whether that water should be paid for. Can we have models where at least lifeline water is made free, or at least for those who cannot afford it, we have to find a way for them to access the right to water without having to rely on the market. Having said that, in some of the villages where we have supported NGOs, the Gram Panchayats and the Gram Sabhas really, which is the public body with decision-making body which consists of all citizens, have come to fairly good decisions about water pricing in their villages. So it's not that villagers are saying no to pricing water. It's just that there has to be sustainability and equity, and who gets left out and who gets to decide about the pricing systems, I think, becomes the key. But you asked about our donor model, and Argyam is a grant-making foundation. In some cases, we have given money for revolving loans. But for the most part, we are there to build political capacity of people to address their water and sanitation issues. So that kind of money is not really market money anyway. But there are many new social enterprises that are emerging in the drinking water space. So for example, Acumen Fund, which actually Nandan and I supported in its early years, does support drinking water enterprise, which means that people will set up a water filtration unit in some villages and sell water for drinking at sometimes as low as 7 paisa per liter or up to 20 paisa per liter, the models that I have seen. Now, some of these things are operating in a very grey policy area. I don't think we have quite come to any kind of consensus yet as to whether drinking water can be sold and who gets to decide. Some of these things are up in the courts. Some of these things are going to be addressed in the 12th plan document that is coming out. But there have been informal markets in water forever. And today, some of the more formal markets, backed by global investors, backed often by patient capital, are coming into the area of basic services in the absence of any state action in some places. I mean, for example, I just came back from Bihar, where Ganesh Pandey has set up a rice husk power system. And that place is called Tamkuha, which rather sadly and appropriately means fog of darkness. And honestly, these 74 villages have never seen the state's action on energy since we got independent. 65 years, they've never seen the state come there and give any form of energy. So while we can all talk and say that it is the state's responsibility to provide energy, water, education, health, in the meantime, while they wait for the state, Ganesh Pandey and his team have put up a rice husk power system that has brought light into the huts of many of those women for the first time. And this is what is happening when it comes to the role of the markets in basic services. And that debate is still open, and it has not been formalized. That role has not been formalized, and there is a threat that what happened in the microfinance industry in India might happen in these sectors. So we are watching that space. But Argyam does not go into the market space, but there are others who do.
Fine. So Argyam has done a lot of work in rural India, obviously through its grantees, but I know that one of your current focal concerns is small towns.
Yeah.
What is a small town? And why has Argyam made bringing water sustainably to small towns its central focus?
Yeah, so I think a lot of work has been done in rural India, especially on water systems and water resources, and also on political empowerment. Over 60 years, so many NGOs and so many government programs have focused on rural India. But there is this whole, and the metros tend to manage something somehow on their own, and the big cities, 53 million plus cities in India. But there are still 7,000, actually 8,000 by the latest census, urban centers, and 7,000 of them just fall between the stools. Neither are they class 1 and 2 cities. They're somewhere between class 3, 4, 5 and 6 cities, and 7,000 of such habitations where frankly we really can't be very proud of the public infrastructure and services delivery over there. I believe that because much of our public infrastructure for these 7,000 habitations, which have more than 200 million people, so the scale of the problem in India is always so huge. As we think about building out our public infrastructure and services in these 7,000 towns, it's almost like greenfield. There's no legacy issues, you don't already have something to work with, and it seems like a great opportunity to build out something that is right, knowing what we know about what's happening with the environment and issues of both environmental sustainability and financial sustainability. So Argyam actually started about 4 years ago looking at and there are no NGOs really working in this sector. Most Indian NGOs work in the rural sector. It's just beginning to happen, the urban activism in India, and not enough of it is around water yet. So we didn't really have any partners. So Argyam's DNA is, we are kind of hybrid. Secretly our DNA is to be activists ourselves. So we decided to go out and look for a town that would work with us on integrated urban water management approaches. And a small town called Mulbagal, not very far from Bangalore, was the site that was chosen where the town municipal corporation agreed to allow Argyam to sit across the board with it and create a plan as to from where they were to where they would want to go. And it's been a tremendous learning. So let me very quickly just show you some pictures that will tell you. Mulbagal is a town of about, I have to go way back. Mulbagal is a beautiful town which actually used to be called Mudala Bagalu, which means the first door. And it was considered the door from the east to the very historic Vijayanagar Empire. It is a beautiful little town of lakes and craggy hills. But unfortunately, now you're seeing the story in reverse so we thought, let us see how we can learn some lessons about creating a more sustainable approach to water management in small towns. The paradigm for the large towns in India and cities has been to get water from far away at high cost. I live in a city where I'm ashamed to say we get water, though we get more than 9,000 millimeters of rain falling so beautifully on our heads, and it was a city of 260 lakes. I'm sorry to say that we get much of our water now from the river Kaveri, which is 60 miles away and 500 meters below us. So all that water has to be pumped up to us. We had a nice river flowing in our backyard called the Arkavati, but we finished it off. Now we are drawing all this water from the Kaveri, and we will not be able to draw, because of a tribunal judgment, we will not be able to draw more water from the Kaveri anymore. So what have we done? We are going deep and sucking out all the aquifers of the south, and even so we are going deeper and deeper and deeper. That's been the paradigm. Delhi is the mother. It's criminal in the way it uses water. It's turned the mighty Yamuna into a sewer right in its backyard. It's been drawing water from the Tehri and is now planning to look for water from even further away. But that model is clearly not going to be sustainable. And if you have 7,000 towns waiting in line for water from our mighty rivers, well, they're not going to get any, and it's going to be like that tail end structure I showed you in Rajasthan. So Mulbagal, like many towns in India, is completely dependent on groundwater. And because the way the state government sees the 220 small towns in Karnataka, it sees them sitting in Bangalore and say, let's make a plan for 220 towns. Mulbagal is in Kolar, and Kolar is a dark zone. Kolar doesn't have groundwater. Therefore, Mulbagal doesn't have groundwater. Therefore, Mulbagal should get water from the Netravati river, which is here, and we'll put a pipeline like this and we'll give it water. Well, we said, let's find out if that's true. And some of the work that we did right in the beginning was to say, let's really find out what's happening in Mulbagal. So we went to the Indian Institute of Science, and we created a partnership with them to really map the groundwater and the aquifer around Mulbagal. And one of the most interesting things we found out was that actually, even though Mulbagal is at a height, it has on one side an underground dike, like a dam, which holds in its water. So actually, in the center of the town, the water table is quite high. And what we also found out is because 80 to 90% of Mulbagal's waste, human waste, is mixed up with that water and doesn't have a smart way to drain out, guess what? All of it goes into that water. And so Mulbagal's groundwater levels keep rising, but they keep rising with the wrong kind of water. So that water is less and less and less drinkable. So they have to go further out to get clean water into their system, and of course it keeps coming higher and higher. So it's a complex story, but as it happens, we were able to do all that just by doing some scientific mapping. So let's see what pictures I have here. This is just some scenes from Mulbagal. So one of the things we did was find out more about the groundwater, find out what's happening to the power situation in Mulbagal. It has 5 big pumps, and we found out that because those pumps were not the right kind of pumps, and because I'm not a science graduate, that's how I'm going to talk about pumps. I'm sure there's a smarter way to say that. But we did find out that by replacing one pump, we were able to improve the pumping efficiency of that entire station, and much more water was able to flow out to that part of the city just by replacing one pump. It also reduced the town's municipal bill by thousands of rupees. So some of these simple low-hanging fruit things which are well within the purview of towns to do is what we tried to do. So this is what our study showed us, something to the effect of what I said, that in the center of town, there was high water tables, but then we found out that was terrible quality. So we said, okay, rainwater, again 800 millimeters of rain is falling on Mulbagal town. So we started to do rainwater harvesting for the public institutions like the schools and the municipal offices. And the children had cleaner water than they had before. We started, you cannot be an external agent coming into a small town and hope to change it without winning over not just the people's representatives, but the people themselves. So we got together ward level organizations and got them working on issues on the demand side. Getting them to speak much more loudly with more voice and power to their representatives to say, why is our water situation so bad? We created a whole communication campaign called Jala Jagruti, which means water awareness, and just started getting people to understand that these were the areas we were going to focus on. It was a source to sink kind of approach, but for the people it meant these 5 or 6 clear tracks that they could identify. Solid waste water management, toilets in households, community toilets in the slums, rainwater harvesting, energy, efficiency measures, and so on. One of the things that we did do was to say that it's a beautiful historic town with many temples, a beautiful Sufi mosque, many Sufi centers. It's truly exquisite. And it has temple tanks. There are 26 temple tanks in that little town of 8 square kilometers that are in terrible shape, somewhat like this. So it's a place where everyone conveniently throws all their garbage because it's really nobody's tank, even though it should be everyone's. So we said, let's get the local elected representative and the local people together and say, what can you do with something like this? It's your town, it's your water tank. So over time, with a lot of help and with very little external money involved, the tank slowly got cleaned up with this crew of people. Look what we found in it. Look what we found more in it. And it's a 300-year-old, this is the tea, it's called a Kalyani, a temple tank. And here's what we found, a second story inside, and that. And then we found these little idols over there, which have gone to the Archaeological Society now to be dated. And here's what happened to that tank. It became a swimming pool pretty quickly. And today it's getting fenced off, and here's what it's looking like. This has enthused the district commissioner so much that he's taken up a program with State Finance Commission funds to revive all the Kalyanis in that district. And some 64 are under renovation right now. So the point I'm making is low-level, low-hanging fruit, small entry activities after mapping the demand, after mapping the situation on the ground, can help small towns to chart their own path depending on local resources first. So today I don't think Mulbagal needs to rely on the Netravati river, which is 45 kilometers away, and on the map of the state is still planned to show water coming to Mulbagal. We have been able to show, if you map the water resources correctly, if you do conjunctive use of your ground and rainwater, you can possibly at a much lower cost of production of water. Bangalore's cost of production of water per kiloliter for 1,000 liters is close to 20 rupees, though it charges me only 6 rupees for 1,000 liters. The city pays 20 rupees to get that wonderful water from the Kaveri. The cost of production of water in a place like this will be less than 3 rupees. So as we look ahead to how 7,000 towns are going to be financed, we really have to look at some of these things and what it is possible to do. We also said water, solid waste. India's solid waste problems are quite exciting. I mean, if you were trying to be in the solution space, because there's lots to do. So so we said there was absolutely no pickup of solid waste. So we said, and all this was going into those beautiful water bodies. So we got some people together, simple things, segregate your garbage, get women's groups involved. We distributed, these are tipped little trucks that came around collecting the garbage. So that's working quite nicely in 3 wards, and now it's spreading to other wards, but slowly. We also said there are 9,000 households in Mulbagal, but 1,000 without toilets. We try to get them toilets. I won't spend too much time on that. We revived some community toilets. We put up a wastewater treatment plant, and so on. So again, there are many simple things that you can do in small towns, I believe, which will make basic services much more financially sustainable, which can work at the level of capacity at where those people are, because there's not that much capacity to do O&M of large water projects. I think there's a huge opportunity in small towns. Sorry, that was longer than I intended. I might have gone on till midnight.
No, that was great. That was great, actually, and it's a very inspiring story. And one of the things that you've said repeatedly, both about when you talked about your work through your grantees, and now so movingly about your work in Mulbagal and the optimism it gives you for other small towns following suit. One of the comments you brought up 2 or 3 times already in this short discussion is the central role of the community. You always seem to start with not just the community leaders, but the community members themselves. So why is it that you are, or how is it that you've become focused on not just community involvement, but generally community leadership as so critical to Arikayam's water sector philosophy?
Yeah, government is doing what government must do. But I think that, at least in my work in education and what I've seen in the microfinance sector, unless the quality of the demand from the people and from the citizens is high, your impact on public services cannot be as efficient as you want it to be. So unless you have an aware citizenry that knows both its rights and groups together and uses its own energy and skills. Citizens are not blank slates. There's a lot of creativity and skill residing in communities all over India, especially in water. I mean, we have thousands of years of work in water engineering. So using community to put pressure on the public services, I think is critical, is going to remain critical as we go ahead. Because many projects, and I have nothing against big engineering projects, and that's not what I'm saying. But who gets to make the decisions? Who gets to be at the decision-making table when big water is designed? I think it's going to come down to that, because eventually it's the local communities that get left with the bill. So I think our NGOs have been doing a fairly credible job of empowering people to try and have a voice at that decision table, either through their own elected representatives or then through some parallel ways. So I think we believe that the kind of leadership that makes that happen has to be supported.
That's very critical and very important to know. So let me ask a follow-up question to that. As you know, Sarah Kailath, in whose memory we are hosting this talk, was an ardent supporter of women in community and public life. So can you tell us a little bit about how your community initiatives and your search for community leaders particularly involves and engages women and youth, either as already existing leaders or as potentially nurturing their leadership capacity? What have been your challenges in this space, and what maybe are 1 or 2 of your proudest achievements?
Yeah, so I think the big silent revolution in India is really what's happening to women's empowerment. I mean, the papers are full of the awful stuff. But over the last 20 or 30 years, if you look at what's happened to the self-help groups, there are 60 million women who have been at some point or the other part of a self-help group. And that is the social glue that is helping them to create voice. And not all of them are successful. No. Not all of them achieve what they want to do. I don't want to romanticize it. But they still have an institution to call their own that is right where they are. And out of that, we have seen, because of the reservation and the panchayat election system, 1 million women, and that's no mean number, 1 million women have held political office. Now, that is going to make a change. It begins sometimes with somebody nominating their wives, but slowly and surely that woman begins to talk. And I've seen this dozens of times all over the country. And women are beginning to change the priorities at the local level. When budgets are getting made, it may not necessarily be a road. It might first be a hospital that they want. It might first be an children's place and children's daycare center that they want. It might be a well, it might be water. So they are beginning to slowly but surely change the priorities in India. So I think the role of women in public life in the last 20 years has grown dramatically but silently. Of course, the more obvious ones are our women feisty chief ministers and the leader of the Congress party. A lot of women, 5 chief ministers, 4 chief ministers of states are women in India. But more than that, I think seeing how the voice of women is coming into decision making more and more and more, I think gives me a lot of hope. And some of the challenges, of course, are that as women get more freedom and more power, the other sex may not always like it so much. So you are beginning to see quite a reaction. I mean, there is some regressive movement in some parts of the state where the panchayats are beginning to say that young women should not have mobile phones, because mobile phones have been just a tremendous liberating force for women. And you're seeing a bit of the backlash, so we won't be able to take those rights for granted. We'll have to keep fighting politically to make sure they are there. But women in public life in India are making great strides.
Wonderful. I want to open it up soon to the audience who I know are waiting to ask you questions. But I want to ask you one last question, if I may. Your organization, Arghya, I've thought about its name for a while. And it's named for a Sanskrit word meaning offering.
Yes.
What is the significance of this name to your efforts and your approach? Why did you choose to call it offering?
Right, that was a name my mother had suggested actually. So we just celebrated her 1 year. We celebrated her life. It's exactly a year since she passed away. But she used to give me some wonderful names for some of the work that I did. Arghya means offering. So to me, it was fairly obvious that I call myself an accidental philanthropist, because my husband calls himself an accidental entrepreneur, and because he was accidentally an entrepreneur, I accidentally became wealthy enough to be an accidental philanthropist. And I just felt that that money is really not mine in the sense that, too many external factors made it possible for us to have that wealth, and that wealth has a responsibility to be offered back, shared forward, given forward. And so it seemed to me to represent my sense that it has to be offered back for the purpose for which it was created in the first place. So that's what Arghya meant.
Wow. Thank you very much. I mean, that was pretty inspiring. Chance to ask a few questions. Who would like to start? Please, sir, go ahead.
I really enjoyed this. In some ways, reinforces some work I've done as well, which you shared earlier. But I have another question. On the issue of water wars, let's say we get into a little bit of politics here too. So what's happening in Terry, multinationals, need and use of water, Coca-Cola, and so while we're trying to save a temple tank there, we have millions of gallons of water being siphoned off into bottled water. Distillery, I mean, this is what we call distillery. It's a brand name.
Yeah.
That's what it is now.
Sure.
Where is this going to lead to? And the amount of damming and so forth that's going on, and just what is the truth in Vandana Shiva's trying to claim about that? And how will this impact? I'm sure that water is not going to get to the village, for sure. But it is water.
Yeah.
The quantities are wrong.
Yeah.
To some extent, quality. I mean, it's from the operations of Ganga and Yamuna, not the
Yes.
Places where, well, Australia, where I lived for 30 years, is one of the continents that doesn't have any other resources
What is the question?
Let's give the speaker a chance to respond. I think we understand.
Thank you, but it's a very important point that you have raised. Actually, the reason why water is reaching such a crisis point is because there is much more competition for the same resource. 80% used to be used in agriculture, about 7 or 8% in industry, and about the rest for domestic, and of course there were environment flows. But today industry is asking, urban and industry are asking for much bigger shares of that water. And how is that allocation going to happen? We are doing some new institutional arrangements across the states of India. There's a lot of quiet water sector reform happening. And it's a very hot debate. The water debates in India are extremely polarized, unfortunately, sometimes missing the point altogether. But you're right. I mean, the multinationals, the industries, they need water too. But I'll tell you one thing, I think it's a positive trend. The bigger companies that have a large water footprint are very quickly going ahead of the curve. Whether any of the multinationals you look at, or even our own multinationals like ITC, if you go to any of their campuses and if you look at their water footprint and how much they are using per cost of production in their production chains, they are trying to reduce their water footprint very quickly because they know that it's not going to be easy for them to be politically able to negotiate allocations to them. So I see a very positive trend, whether it's all the big guys you can think of, whether it's Coke or Nestle or Pepsi or ITC or Sam Miller or anyone in India, inside the fence and in their supply chains, they are moving very rapidly because you can see conflicts arising outside their gate all over the country.
Yes.
But I'll never forget when I was sitting under a boat near the Kosi River in Bihar, which had just gone through its floods. And I was just talking to the men who were sitting there, and we were talking about how difficult it is in flood time. I said, so what would you like to do? You know, what, I mean, you have all this water, it seems like a big resource, your agriculture. What? They said, you know, what's up? Oh, sorry. They said, you know, those big water companies that bottle water, we would love to bottle water and sell it because we have so much. So really, water is local. From Bihar, we would be most happy if you bottled some of it and took it away, so long as the value of that got captured locally, which is the problem, right? But we do have a case pending in the Supreme Court between Coke and the people of Plachimada in Kerala, which has not yet been resolved. And that, I think, once it is resolved, is going to once and for all settle the public doctrine issue in India as to whose water is it anyway. And there will be definitely some very interesting battles ahead. And indeed, there are 1 million conflicts in India every single day over water.